Greetings, Theories of Abstraction students. Happy Friday. I hope this video greets you after having coming to the end of a productive and rewarding week. It's hard to believe that we have reached really the end of new content for this class. Our 8-week exploration of abstraction is concluding soon. Next week, you'll be given the freedom to work on your papers. I won't be providing any new content for you, any new material. Please take next week to write me if you have any questions. And certainly the first part of next week, I'll be responding to your last discussion prompts that are due on Sunday night. Just want to say I've had a great time working with you. I feel like even though it's through email and through distance, that periodically you're able to see my face in these rather silly video introductions and discussions when I hem and haw my way through. I feel like I've gotten to know you, and I really value it and treasure the time that we spend together. I've learned a lot about this subject. Found new ways to think about the development of abstraction, and I have you to thank. I teach not necessarily because I have knowledge to impart to you, but that I'm still searching and I'm still questioning and I'm trying to figure out things, and teaching is a means by which I do that. And so your responses, your discussion prompts, the questions that you pose to me, your observations are really helpful to me. And so selfishly, I need your help to get where I want to go, which I actually don't know where I want to go. I just want to get someplace else and go deeper. And so I want to thank you. I want to thank you for the privilege that I have to be able to explore this with you and to help you in your journey. And I hope the time that we've spent together has given you a pretty interesting library of PDFs and books and resources and bibliographies, resources that you can use in your subsequent coursework, perhaps in your thesis, in the work that you do as a teacher and as an educator, as a museum person, or as a person who just wants to be more deeply informed and deeply connected to the roots of contemporary art through the history of modern art and theory and criticism. Just to let you know, I'll be teaching for the second session this spring. I'll be teaching the Modernism in the Museum course. I think it's Art 605, and I'll be sending out an introductory email, probably today, to just introduce myself to those that are going to be along for the journey. Many of you in this class are going to come along for the ride, and I'm looking forward to that as well. So if you haven't made a decision about what you want to take any classes in the second session, I invite you to sign up for the Modernism in the Museum class. All right, what I want to talk about today is to get at a little bit of this strange influence of Mondrian's, which opens up into a larger context regarding spirituality and abstraction. And this is Mondrian, the influence of theosophy on the work of Mondrian. And so I'll give a little bit of background to theosophy, some of its implications, how Mondrian thought about it, and as a way for us to think about abstraction. First of all, there's no inherent spirituality in abstraction. It's not as if by making an abstract work, a painter is signaling the spiritual. abstraction has formed the basis of political activity, of undoing the past, of starting again, to deconstruct in order to reconstruct. Abstraction has also been a means of stylistic and formal innovation. And that aspect of the political and social development, as well as stylistic or formal innovation, don't have anything inherently spiritual, in a sense that abstraction is inherently a means of contemplation, of rejecting the material world for a spiritual, deeper spiritual reality. For in fact, an important part of abstraction is focusing on the material bases of art. What is art? It's not imagery, it's not symbols, it's not esoteric meanings, it's not stories, it's paint. It's line, form, color. It's paint on a flat surface. And abstraction signals that the painting is not an image, first and foremost, it's an artifact by which we project it as an image. That in itself, as we talked about from the first week of class, the act of experiencing a painting itself, whether that painting is Jesus hanging on the cross, or Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, or Achilles performing heroic acts, or Hercules performing heroic acts, or a vase of flowers, or a female nude reclining on a couch. It's first and foremost an artifact, paint on a flat surface. And that how we activate it is itself a form of abstraction, of conceptualization, of reduction. But you can't reduce a painting of a nude to the nude. Because I can describe to you what a painting looks like, and what you will get in your mind is not what the painting looks like or is. And even beautiful exhibition catalogs with full-page reproductions and details of the painting, of a painting in question, do not give you a full sense of what the painting is in its phenomenological and existential reality as an artifact. So abstraction isn't inherently spiritual, and yet it becomes a tool by which artists are resisting the material world. And you can resist the material world not just in focusing on spirituality and religion, but you can resist the material world as the utopian socialists did. That there is another way of living, that there's another way of organizing ourselves materially and spiritually, or materially and socially and politically, that remains open to us. And that possibility can be kept open through abstraction. It's a resistance to materialism, to what we see and feel as all that's there. There is this something else, this something more. Now, it's also that something more and something else that using abstraction as a way of signaling the spiritual and the religious emerges as well. And that's an aspect of Mondrian's work, and the attraction of a particular religious movement that developed in the last quarter of the 19th century in Europe, in Central Europe first, and then it spreads to Western Europe, to England, and then into the United States, is Theosophy, which was developed by a Russian founder. She was a Russian fortune teller, and her name was Madame Blavatsky. Now, what Theosophy does is attempt to create unity out of the separation of traditional Western distinctions between God and nature, between Eastern and Western religion and Eastern and Western philosophy, between Christianity and Buddhism and Hinduism, between art and science and religion and science. And the attempt is to try to create a holistic view of the world. You could say it's even a pantheistic view of the world, in which God and the spiritual is everywhere. And that it has certain connections with the pantheism of the Dutch Jewish philosopher Baruch Spinoza and his notion of pantheism, the idea that God and nature are the same thing. God is in nature, God is nature, nature is God. Nature has a will and an intention. You can call it God if you want, you can call it nature if you want. That was Spinoza's heretical philosophical argument in the 17th century, which got him excommunicated from his Jewish synagogue, which opened him up to the heresy of atheism, banned his books, and so theosophy was a way of coming back to the spiritual, coming back to God, but doing so not through the structures of traditional Abrahamic religions, through monotheism, through either the Judeo-Christian and the Islamic view of God and nature as separate. That implies all kinds of doctrinal theology, of political theology, of a way of thinking about society and the cosmos. And what is interesting about this is that for Mondrian was raised in a strict Dutch Calvinist home. The Netherlands were a Calvinist, deeply Calvinist country. That Calvinism, that Protestantism was, I hesitate to say iconoclastic. It was iconoclastic when it came to works of art representing religious iconography and religious imagery, say the visual arts in the church. But that kind of iconoclasm, that Protestant iconoclasm, created a rich and robust market for the visual arts. But there is, for Mondrian's work, his reductive abstractions, the 90-degree right angles, the use of primary colors, the stripping of it of any representational subject matter, figurative subject matter at all, comes out of a kind of Calvinist asceticism. And so it makes Mondrian's work, in some ways, it makes his thought process, I should say, amenable to a kind of spirituality that is not embodied in imagery, as theosophy was connecting deeply with a spiritual sense of life. What the 19th century liberal Christian Reformed theologian Friedrich Schleiermacher called a feeling of total dependence. And that increased view in modernity that the spiritual does exist, but it's not interpreted. It doesn't exist in the way that traditional monotheistic religions have interpreted it. And so it created a tremendous eclecticism. So instead of rejecting Christianity, it used New Testament, Old Testament text, it used Hindu text, it used Buddhist narratives. It used prayer and meditation. It also used seances. And seances were a significant practice in Europe in the 19th century. Victor Hugo participated in seances when he was in exile on the Channel Island, when he was writing several of his most important novels. And Mondrian, wherever Mondrian went, Mondrian was a member of the Dutch Philosophical Society. When he moved to Paris, he was a member of the Parisian Philosophical Society. It became a means, the Theosophical Society became an anchor from which his life and his work emerged. Now, what is also interesting is that Theosophy was very influential on another artist, an artist we haven't talked about, an artist whose work throws into disarray and throws a wrench into the narrative genealogy and taxonomy that Alfred Barr developed in his famous diagram of the development of modernism and abstraction in his exhibition catalog, Cubism, Cubism and Abstract Art, the exhibition that he staged in 1936. And that is the work of the Swedish painter Hilma af Klint, A-F-K-L-I-N-T. And I'll include a link to her, to an exhibition she had at the Guggenheim. Now, Klint developed abstraction not in the process of going back to Russian icons or looking at Western European art. She wasn't influenced by Kandinsky or Malevich. In fact, she predates them. And her magnificent abstractions, her gigantic monumental abstract paintings, came out of the seances she had within the context of theosophy. She devoted her entire adult life to the study of theosophy, participated in seances, took detailed notes of her interactions with various spiritual guides she made contact with. One spiritual guide told her that she needed to make paintings for this new temple. And so she went about making these paintings, I think 190 of them total, for this temple that was going to be built in the future. Her paintings were paintings for the future. Now, what's interesting is that they don't come out of connection with art history. They don't come out of connection with influence of other abstract artists. They come out of her engagement with theosophy and various other outshoots and outgrowths of theosophy, including Rosicrucianism, which took on various forms of a Hermetic Christian ascetic tradition. And I've also, in the email I've included, it would be interesting for you to compare Alfred Barr's extremely influential exhibition, Cubism and Abstract Art in 1936, the diagram they produced, a way of providing this framework for the development of modernism, which we've talked about, and the Museum of Modern Art's restaging and reinterpretation of that history in a 2012 exhibition called Reinventing Abstraction. And the different theories of abstraction, the different theories of influence that are operative in the curatorial theses is quite striking. Very interesting. So I provide that link. Those that will take my Modernism in Museum class will focus on the work of Alfred Barr and the Museum of Modern Art in great depth. And I hope these comments are helpful to you. Again, I've really appreciated the time that you've spent. I know that's a sacrifice for you. I know that you do. You have day jobs. You have adult responsibilities as parents, spouses, the busyness of life. And I very much respect the fact that you are pushing ahead and sacrificing time where you can simply just relax. And exerting this effort to pursue additional training and education in the history of modern art. And it's my privilege to be able to serve as a guide for you, and I thank you for that privilege.